Hello, everyone. Welcome to Horror 101 with Dr. AC. My name is Aaron Christensen, and we're going to be doing another of our happy anniversary installments. Today, we're going to be honoring, well, we'll see how honored it gets, honoring the 25th anniversary of the release of Halloween H20, 20 years later. That was the first time that Jamie Lee Curtis came back, and then she came back again in the 40 years later, Halloween 2018. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring in my crew of folks today, and we're going to chat about all things Halloween 20 years ago, 40 years ago. My guests today are John Kitley of Kitley's Crypt, S.A. Bradley of Hellbent for Horror, and Aaron Abishan of Discover the Horror. And we are here to celebrate our halfway to Halloween because, yes, it's April, folks, and that means 6 months from now, it will be October. Gentlemen, thank you all for joining us.
Glad to be here.
Now, I want to just be upfront about this because I was the one who called this crazy meeting because I realized that we were coming up on the 25th anniversary of Halloween H20. And what I remember when Halloween 2018 came out and made all that money, so I was like, well, Halloween H20 did pretty well in terms of bringing Laurie Strode back into the fold, and it made some money, but it certainly wasn't the blockbuster that Halloween 2018 was. I saw H20 in the theater, and I liked it just fine. I liked Scream, and so I was happy that Kevin Williamson was on board. And I thought they did a pretty decent job of kind of like keeping the mythology alive and telling us a story and giving us what at the time seemed like a fitting conclusion to a flagging franchise. So that was kind of my thoughts. I'm curious to hear anybody who wants to jump in, anybody's thoughts on when H20, their first encounter with it.
I kind of felt the same way that I did this time. When I first saw it, there were set pieces that I thought were really good. It is definitely of its time. So there's a certain kind of attitude and snarkiness that's kind of built into it that has to do with how people were looking at Buffy the Vampire Slayer at the time, as well as what Kevin Williamson did with Scream. But I remember when I first saw it, I was really excited by the opening sequence, the pre-credit sequence, because they did it so interestingly. I loved how they slowly brought the light down. So it's happening at magic hour, right? And every shot is done, and it's just a little bit darker, a little bit darker, a little bit darker until we actually have the kids go inside of the house. And just that whole thing gave me the feeling of like, it wasn't as hokey as the other sequels of Halloween was. Oh, yeah. It had this feeling that they were taking it seriously at that moment, that they were trying to give it some credit. There are some moments in the movie that I think are dogs, sure. But there are a couple of set pieces that I think are really good. And the iconic shot of her looking through that little porthole window, that whole scene really does hold up. And I love how they talk about Laurie Strode as going through some kind of crazy trauma. I thought it was clever that they had the thing where she would close her eyes and he would go away. And then as he's coming towards her, she closed her eyes a couple times. I was like, okay, there's some thinking going on in this. And so, for the most part, I thought Steve Miner did himself okay.
Yeah, that's right. Steve Miner directed that. And he did, obviously known for the Friday the 13th parts 2 and 3. Let me shoot that down to Aaron. What were your feelings when you saw it the first time, H20?
I have no idea. Honestly, I have absolutely no recollection of the first time I saw this film. I was never particularly invested in Halloween as a later franchise, and I felt like it had burned out a lot of its steam by the time they did this, so it felt gimmicky to me. And I'll probably say this several times, but I feel like the biggest problem with Halloween is that just like anything that's built on a bad foundation, anything you do downstream of a particular event that causes the foundation to become untenable is just going to continue to perpetuate the badness. So in my opinion, John Carpenter, as I always say, is as a whole is one of my very favorite directors of all time. But John Carpenter is also the reason that this series had to keep fighting its way out of a paper bag. And that's because he got drunk one night and decided to make Michael Myers and Laurie Strode brother and sister. And this is just the natural evolution of that bad idea. It's the turd in the punch bowl of the horror film franchises, and I don't know what you do with it particularly, other than to try to resolve it as best you can, shake your head, and walk away. So I don't know. This is the resolution to an idea that I think was a terrible one to begin with. That said, I still have a place of nostalgia for the second Halloween film, the one that committed that in my mistake, or in my estimation, huge mistake. But yeah, I watched this film again and didn't feel any warmer about it than I did the last time, and I don't even remember that viewing. So sorry.
That's quite all right. That's why you're here. John Kitley, what was your do you remember seeing it the first time?
I saw it opening weekend with a packed full of delinquents, juvenile. I'm totally playing my old man card here because I saw this in the theater. Everybody loved it. And I'm sitting there going, you gotta be kidding me. I thought it was by the book numbers. There were a few things that I did like that I thought were like with, especially rewatching it this time, the part with Pamela Stevens, I thought was an interesting take, that the fact that they actually brought the actress back.
Mm-hmm.
But I just thought it's terrible. Michael Myers does not act at all like Michael Myers. I mean, the guy is not even trying to do the Michael. I mean, he's not even doing a poor imitation of Michael Myers. He's just a guy walking around. And I don't know, with Williamson involved in it, to me, that just looked like a cash cow, that they were just going to weigh in on his success from Scream. We're going to knock this out. And I don't know. I just watching it recently, I was not impressed any more than I was 25 years ago when I first watched it.
It is totally Diet Scream. That's all, it's Diet Scream, you know.
I mean, look at the poster. The poster art is exactly like Scream. So that shows you the creativity involved in this film.
Well, we can't say. I mean, that's the advertising.
Yeah,
it's the advertising.
Still, but it follows through.
Yeah. What I'll say is that Williamson, was he the original writer, or did he come into script doctorate? Because
no, he was. The idea originated, as the story goes, the idea originated with Jamie Lee Curtis coming to Kevin Williamson and saying, you know, we're coming up on 20 years. I'm gonna be in it. And you're gonna write it. Yeah.
And I read he wrote a treatment.
Right.
And halfway through the treatment, it is, and then we could do like this movie, and then we could have this part like this movie. Well, so that's how original this film.
And if you look
you're seeing that as a negative, and I think that was the sort of meta analysis of its time, right? I don't know that was them saying like let's rip off. Right. It was them saying how can we incorporate?
This is it was fan service, you know. And I mean, we see plenty of fan service.
Oh my God!
2018.
Everything that's terrible about these last couple movies is like fan service, where I'm going, oh, there's somebody else off the ground. Look at that. He picked somebody off the ground. My goodness. I will say that it's funny that you mention how bad that Michael Myers is, because he is. I mean, and I'm not calling him The Shape. I'm calling him Michael Myers on that. Because he has no shoulders. You think they could have got somebody with shoulders? I was like, look, they got Abel Ferrara. Abel Ferrara's playing. It's like they had to put him on a box, it seemed, to make him taller.
This movie, you're right. It needed Kane Hodder, right?
Yeah, you're right. He needs to get bigger and bigger. Yeah,
I'm kidding.
Something really huge.
We already had Tyler Mane, you know, doing that incarnation.
But as I hated it back when it first came out, I liked it for about 10 seconds, and then I did not like H20. But watching it again, I had a little bit more for it. You know, I said, he did a decent job considering what it was coming out of, the shambles that there was before it. It also does the thing which I think is kind of the revolutionary piece that affects all the other Halloweens after it, which is, well, we're not going to even talk about that movie. No, fuck that movie. That one doesn't exist. This is the new canon. And we're going to even make a joke about the bad ideas that there were in the other ones. And we're going to let that go. We're going to bring back some of the older actors that were in the original film and put them in here in these different pieces. So I think that there was stuff in there, but it's very 90s. It is of its time. And I think as much as it's by the book, we're saying that now. I think at the time it was really derivative if you're a big horror fan, but it certainly did something that everybody was taking note to, and it allowed, I guess, talk and discussion for all these other films that were going to be given a reboot. I think you can really look at H2O as probably the beginning of that.
Well, and what I would say, because I watched H2O again, and I was like, I really, really like this movie. I feel like it does exactly what it sets out to do, which is to try and right the ship that has been tipped on its side since part two. I agree. I think I mean, I know there are people who are fans of it. I think Halloween 2 is not a great sequel at all.
No.
And I think that just 4, 5, 6, like it's not a good franchise considering what a great character you have. And what's interesting is that the thing that made Michael Myers so scary in the first one, in that he was unkillable, is what makes him such a drag for the rest of the series, because you're like, he's unkillable. So what's the big deal? But with H2O, what I like about it is that it doesn't, I feel with 2018, it kind of did a ballsy move, and it was like, we're going to ignore everything that happened after the first movie. And I was kind of like, that is super ballsy. It's also kind of chicken shit. And I would say that it's also, hang on, I'll get to you, buddy.
Yeah.
But
I'm raising my hand. That's all.
It kind of like does the thing where it's like, this is fake news. That series that you watched and loved, it's like, no, that didn't actually happen. It's like, no, I saw it happen. I was there. You can't just say it didn't happen. And they don't necessarily do that in H2O. They play more fair than the 2018 one. Yes, she has a son. And if we look at it 4 or 5, she was supposedly had a daughter in Jamie. Mm-hmm. But there's the possibility. And again, they don't acknowledge it much. And I give them credit for that, because it was a tough hole to try and get out of. But they say that she died, and that she faked her own death. Mm-hmm. And it's like, okay, there's a universe in which that could have happened. That not only did she fake her death, she abandoned her child and she relocated under a different name. And in some ways, I find that even more tragic, but it plays fair, at least. It doesn't say that didn't happen. It says it's a stretch of a scenario in which it does happen, but it still feels like they're acknowledging the stuff that we saw actually happened, and here's where we are now. And I appreciate the fact that they were willing to go that extra mile instead of just going, nope. I was like, wow, 2018. I was like, you can't do that. That's really cheap. Anyway, Aaron, yes, I can see you itching. Have at it.
No, I just wanted to say that you said something a little while back that I think is
a
important.
long while back.
Something back there, though, that you said that I think is important to comment on. Your perception of the scariest thing about him is that he's unkillable. And for me, I don't agree with that, because I think the scariest thing that was ever about Michael Myers is that there was some calculation that only Michael Myers knew as to why he killed who he killed. And from 2 on, that calculation was, you're related to me, or you're in the proximity of someone related to me. And what I like about the 2018 forward movies is that it reinstates this notion of that calculation's happening again. And they even take it to a much higher degree, I think, than the original film did, because whereas H2O is just a resolution of that concept, the David Gordon Green films, you see that calculation. You see Michael specifically not kill people. You even see him, and it's a stretch, go on like a buddy killing spree for a couple of moments there. So I think that the idea of Michael that is most terrifying to me is the one that says that it's not random, but there's some calculation that only he knows, and that's what's going to save you or get you killed.
See, I remember, and maybe I missed it, but I was under the assumption that they were totally ignoring 4 and 5 to the point where I didn't buy, and I honestly, I don't remember when it first came out if they were billing it that way, that this is skipping. But the thing of her dying and just forgetting her daughter,
right,
seems about as far-fetched as you could get.
It seems like you'd be traumatized by
it. Well, I don't know. I've always taken it that they're just ignoring it, which is even more fascinating in a bad way that they did it again in 2018. So
Right.
yeah, we're going to even skip the one that we said skip the other ones. We're going to skip all of those. And I just think that's
Well, at least I mean, I guess what I mean by them playing fair is that they at least kept the mythology that they are in fact brother and sister. You know, like 2018 says that didn't even happen.
well, that's what I mean. But in H2O, I think they're implying that
No, they're still brother and sister in that one. They refer to it all the way through that that's my brother, my brother, my
Yeah.
brother.
oh no. I'm sorry.
Michael.
I'm talking about Jamie and the son.
Right.
And
Yeah.
it-
We
I
don't
think they're
talk about Jamie.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I think they completely ignored 4 and 5, whereas in an H2O or in the 2018, they ignored everything.
And I think what's different about it is that they ignore it versus denying it. And I think that was what was the subtle difference for me, was that instead of saying that just didn't happen, they're saying we're just not going to talk about that.
I don't know. For me, it was great wish fulfillment because I wish 4 and 5 had never happened. So, you know, it's an interesting thing. And I thought about this when I was sitting getting ready to watch these movies. For me, and I'm not going to say it's for all horror fans, but there was something really lightning bolt that happened in 1978. I was a horror fan before that, but there was something about Halloween that, for better or for worse, created the entire slasher genre and everything. But it kind of legitimized looking at horror in a certain way. It broadened the appeal, I guess, in a strange way. What happened for me is I sat there and I said, you know, most horror movies, even though I liked them a lot, they looked really cheap and stuff like that. There was something really legitimizing about how sleek and right to the point momentum. There's a nonstop momentum to the original Halloween. It really felt like an event when it took an idea that everybody knew since Wait Until Dark, right? Rote's going to get up and jump back out. You think he's dead. So it's not a new idea, but it took that idea and took it to an illogical, logical place. And it created a mythology that I thought was really exciting for the time, but it was a one-off. You know, I always looked at it as a one-off. And it was one of those things where the movies of the time were pretty much one-offs. It was ballsy that Rocky had Rocky 2 and, you know, things like that. But you didn't have something like Halloween 2, and it wasn't in the plans. And they coerced Carpenter to do something with it. You know, it was all the money push. So I've never really looked at any of that stuff fondly. And it's interesting because that movie meant so much to me. And I'm so ambivalent about most of the stuff that came out after that.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like a complete, you would think that I'd have more compassion for them or that I would have more interest in them. I've seen them all. I've held my nose for some of them, and I've gone to see them in the theaters when I could. But it hits me that the thing that I love the most, that I think really was a moment where I said, maybe I can do something in horror as well. This movie came out of nowhere and it made all this money and critics are talking about it. And I was like going, wow, this could really be something. And I loved Carpenter over it. And I, of course, continued to love all of his movies after that at varying levels. But now I'm kind of like, fuck, I wanted to see somebody like kick down the door in some way or do something different with the Halloween thing. So I never had any problems with the can. I was like, good, get rid of the fucking kid. That fucking kid wasn't supposed to be there. That fucking movie wasn't supposed to be there. Old Pleasance was there. That's what happened. Pleasance walked in and said, oh, let's make a movie around this fucking guy. So I was like, please get rid of all of it. Streamline it again, because these movies are kind of like, you ever hear a band that's like a good punk or a rockabilly band or something like that, or even something like a heavy metal band, and they suddenly decide they're going to play with an orchestra? You know, they're going to have that album where they're just going to, we've played with a London Philharmonic, or we're going to do Eleanor Rigby, you know, we're going to have strings and stuff. It's like, no, you're the Misfits, you know, 2 speakers, that's it, you know. Yeah, and that's where you're lean and you're sleek and all of that stuff. But adding all this pomposity, these strings and this whole thing, it's so complicated for something that is really, really good when it's a one-off, straight ahead line.
Yeah. And I mean, I think kind of Aaron spoke to that, the idea of the mythology of it. Like the mythology of is just that it's the mythology is all set up in the first movie. You're like, this is what happened. And then you realize, oh, Donald Pleasance's character, Dr. Loomis, is right. Like this is the incarnation of evil. And imagine being Sam Loomis and being the only one who knows that Michael is actually pure evil because you're the psychiatrist. You're supposed to not, be given to such flights of fancy. But it's like, no, I know I shouldn't, but that person there is actual evil and I have to kill him. Sorry, everybody. I think we've created such a great character in Michael, and it's the character that we keep coming back to see and hoping that somebody puts a good movie around him. And so rarely does that happen.
Yeah. Well, the shape.
Aaron?
I think it's interesting that you just said that we have created a great character in Michael Myers, because I think that is what the crux of what I like about the David Gordon Green films as opposed to H2O, because both of them are meta-analyses in some ways of the horror genre and the Halloween fandom in particular. But H2O follows the same kind of logic that the sequels had been following. They're all inward looking, and they look at it, the thing itself, without looking outside very often. There's, the Adam Arkin character in H2O, and I love Adam Arkin in just about everything, so he's great. But that character serves to be the witness, right? The person who's like, oh, you're that Laurie Strode. Oh, okay. To make sure that we know that the world is saturated in this mythology inside the film. But the David Gordon Green films, I feel like, incorporate that mythology. The second film is my favorite, which is a very controversial idea. I like Kills the best because I think it is an analysis of the fandom on some levels and the mentality of the fandom whenever it gets kind of cranked up and singular in focus. So I think that it's just kind of cool that that David Gordon Green decided to play with, and his collaborators. And that's one thing I liked listening to his one of the commentaries, was listening to how open to collaboration he was all the way through the process. So everybody working on that film was a fan of the franchise at some level.
Mm-hmm.
And so people had thoughts, and he would incorporate the ones that he thought were really interesting. So not only was it not just his take on it, this meta-analysis, but he was also listening to the community itself, the community of fans itself, as he was making it.
So, but I guess one of the things I think in terms of the mythologies that are created, because with H2O, as you say, it is very internalized, and we kind of follow the track that Michael Myers has been this boogeyman for 20 years, and he has murdered and murdered and murdered and murdered, and his death toll is in the 100. It's a lot of people he's killed from then till now. Whereas in the David Gordon Green one, he is a guy who killed one person, then killed 4 more people, was apprehended, and then put away for another 20 years. And you're kind of like, or 40 years. And you go, well, wait a minute. Like, how is this character legendary? Who would even remember Michael Myers if he'd only killed 4 people? Like, the idea of these British podcasters are coming over and like going, we're going to go dig this up. And I have a friend of the Attorney General's office, and I've got him, going to get Michael's mask. And I was just like,
God.
I'm like, this feels like a large stretch in terms of the mythology, the larger than life quality that is Michael Myers. I feel like that is acknowledged in H2O, whereas the 2018, it feels like a bit of a stretch. And it also feels like in H2O, he just shows up with his mask and his overalls because he's been out there. Whereas in 2018, we have to go through this convoluted, he gets his mask back and he gets the coveralls. And I'm just kind of like, wow, like, so much work like building this mythology back in for a character that hasn't been there for 40 years.
That was something that I've been thinking about while we're talking, because Aaron mentioned, the mythology, that they're stretching into this mythology. And to me, the mythology was so subtle in the first one, right? We're watching a myth get born. That's what I've always liked about it. It's like the movie starts with a urban legend, right? Oh, she killed, it's like the scary house legend that every town has. And in the end of the movie, the kid that started that was the myth, becomes literally a myth, right? He's not a man anymore. But that's never really stated. That's something that you sit around talking with your friends about. What is he? And then the later movies, it's like writ large, right? Everything is like, when people say evil dies tonight and shit like that, it's just so fucking concentrated, and there's so much effort being put into making this legend or lore or mythology stand, and it's always just been a little subtle whisper. And so that's the thing, everything's over the head, when we get to the later ones, because it's all fan service. Even I mean, it's great that he listened to everybody, but it's also he listened to everybody, and you can almost see where he's listening to everybody. The little asides that you're supposed to catch if you're a super fan are hilarious. Like, hey, Scarecrow, see anything you like? I'm like, oh no, you gotta be fucking kidding me. So that's the whole bedroom thing, and oh god, what a nightmare. So you see that and you go, okay, there are too many cooks, whatever. I think it's the hard thing of, I want to make a really good movie out of this thing that was so fucking simple. And when you're trying to add to something so simple, you're just building and building and building it. And like you said, he had to go to a prison, and then he has to get the mask, and then he has to go and beat people up in a garage and take the coveralls. That's a lot of fucking work to get to the thing of a myth walking down the street. So yeah.
I think. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
No, go.
I was just going to say, and I'm not even a huge fan of Rob Zombie's Halloween, but I'll give him credit for going, I'm making my movie. I'm going to make a completely different animal. And I respect the fact that he didn't do the fan service. He made his film. Whereas in every Halloween film, whether it's forgotten, dismissed, or otherwise, all seem to go, we got to do this. We're going to do this because that's a Halloween film. And you're like trying to repaint the Mona Lisa or something. You're never going to get there. So stop trying. And you keep, it's got to have this and it's got to have this because it's a Halloween movie. And it just seems so derivative each and every time.
Yeah.
Just stop. Please stop.
So I would say to something you said a while back, AC, I think we have to contextualize the mythology as well. A modern serial killer, would we care about their body count? Absolutely. But I'd remind us all that Eddie Gein killed 2 people. The Manson family killed 7.
Sure.
And they're super iconic. So I think that things catch the sort of public consciousness. Things get hung up in the zeitgeist, and I'm not sure that you can lay it down to, just sort of this many cards on this side of the column and this many cards on that side.
Sure.
And I think it's also a hometown thing.
I would also say that one of the things that I like about the David Gordon Green films and Kills in particular is that thing that irritates so many people, that Evil Dies Tonight. I think it's purposefully irritating because I think it's supposed to be, because I think that mob logic is supposed to be like eye-watering, and you're supposed to in the moment go, what the fuck am I doing as a part of this idiocy? Right. But you're still part of it somehow. And you kind of see it with Anthony Michael Hall as his character registers that a little bit. And I think he's an interesting choice in that film because I don't think I can see past him as the nerdy kid from Breakfast Club. Like, it's impossible for him to be the big tough guy that he literally is. If you stand in a room, he's a huge fucking man. He's like a big, scary dude now, but he's still Gary from Weird Science. You want to like tousle him on his mop hair, And I think that these are these weird decisions that were made, but I think that they're really interesting decisions because to me, it doesn't feel like a committee meeting at all. It feels like David Gordon Green knew what he wanted, but he was listening to people and sort of taking the best ideas with a clear concept of what he was trying to accomplish.
Well, and if I could actually, because you and I talked about Halloween Kills last October, and I agree that I think Gordon Green and Danny McBride, like, they're playing with some big ideas. Like, I think that whole idea, we're just going to dismiss all of the mythology that went before. I think that could be a commentary on fake news, on saying we are just going to deny everything you know to be true, and we're going to say this is the truth. And in the same way that you're like talking about how Evil Dies Tonight, like that is a commentary on the mob mentality. And it is a commentary on how Myers feeds off of that violence. And that's why he's able to stay strong and get strong. Even the last one, Halloween Ends, I'm like, he's playing with some ideas there of like how evil can permeate and basically pollute an entire community so that we need a new villain. I think he's playing with all of those ideas. And my feeling is that they don't necessarily translate to successful movie ideas as I'm watching the narrative play out. They're great to kind of sit back and discuss and kind of analyze. But as I'm watching the movie, I'm feeling like, this irritates me. This irritates me. And then later I step back and go, oh, that was intentional, but it was still irritating. So I don't know what the win is there.
Yeah.
Sounds like Fulci.
It was really interesting to me what was being said there, because I saw a lot of big ideas that were there. I think the mob mentality thing in Kills is definitely commenting on where we were at the time. And there's these little giveaways, like the thing where Anthony Michael Hall takes old Huckleberry, the bat off the wall, but he puts money into a donation thing. That's so of a certain type, right? And I forget what it was like to heal some kind of like a muscular dystrophy type thing. It's never really explained what that little change box was, but they're having all these little things about where you've had this place for 50 years, and your grandfather was the first guy who had it. There's all this stuff about tradition and what America used to be is kind of talked about in that. And you have these guys who play these little games, like he's going to go out and he's going to take care of evil, and while he's talking about killing somebody, he's taking $1 and putting it in this donation thing. So that happens, and there's a cutaway to it, so it's not like it's just a little bit of business. It means something, but I'm not necessarily sure it's so heavy-handed. And that's the thing that I think got me with all of these things, that there's so much heavy-handedness to it. But I'll also talk to something that Aaron has mentioned on recent podcasts, which is the violence, that there is this excessive violence that's in movies at this point that he's noticing in a new generation. And I think Halloween Kills is full of that, where you have Lenny Clark, not only like, I don't know who the characters are, but I can tell you how they died. Right. Lenny Clark's the guy who gets stabbed a bunch of times on the table while his wife's bleeding out after getting hit in the neck with a fluorescent light bulb. And so you're sitting there. There's something really powerful about that scene. And also me kind of going, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to really feel energy wise, because it's a movie that lets you feel the deaths, which is something that I always want to see, right? I'm always like, wow, if somebody's dying, I want it to be powerful, not just a throwaway thing. And that was one scene where he's calling out for his wife while he knows she's being destroyed. And then they turn the thing around and you watch her laying there helplessly bleeding out with her eyes blinking, and he's on a table getting all the knives that are up on the wall stabbed into him one at a time, not with any music, not with any drama, no cutaways to like a villain shot. It's just in the background, almost out of focus. I think it was out of focus even. I'm like going, that's some dark shit that's supposed to make you feel bad, and it does. So it's not like these are idiots out there making this movie. There's some really strong shit there.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Like, when you and I, Aaron, talked last October, I was like, I know David Gordon Green is a smart filmmaker. I've enjoyed his movies, from the get-go. And that's why I can't discount what he's putting into the movies as just kind of not knowing what he's doing. I think he does know what he's doing. I just don't, kind of the same way that Rob Zombie absolutely knows what he's putting into the movies. It just isn't necessarily something that I personally enjoy. But that's not to say Rob Zombie is always making the movie he wants to make. And I appreciate, it's one of those things where I love the artist more than I love the art itself. If it's okay, go ahead, Aaron. And then I want to
clarify real quick for you what that bit of business is with the donation. It's Chekhov's slogan. So that bit of business, if you look closely, the donation box says "Love lives today." That's the origin of Evil Dies Tonight. It's just love lives today. Complete each word, it's opposite. That's where the slogan comes from. That's why that business is there.
See, he's smart. He's smart. I do want to talk about Laurie Strode. The Laurie Strode in H2O versus the Laurie Strode in 2018's Halloween. I was watching H2O this time, and I was really struck by that scene in the cafeteria where you see her like downing a glass of wine while Adam Arkin is away, and comes back and demanding that she get another glass so that she can look like she hasn't done it. And she's really dealing with stuff. And I see a more vulnerable and a more fragile version of Laurie Strode, which I enjoyed. And her revelation to Adam Arkin's character of who she really is, I just feel like both of those, I was like, Jamie Lee Curtis is really good. Like I'm watching an actor really turn in a very nuanced performance. I felt less so in the 2018 version. I feel like she's a bit of we've given her, like she's a survivalist and they kind of like, this is who she is. And I feel like that's kind of a monolith that moves through the movie. Like she is this survivalist who's got rough edges around her, but at the core, that's who she is. Like she is this tough lady who's been sitting here for 40 years. Why, if she was so scared, why is she staying in Haddonfield anyway? It's one of those things where I was just like, I like the Laurie Strode from H2O more than I like the Laurie Strode from 2018. And that's
the Linda Hamilton.
Preference. That's the personal preference.
And again, I'm not a fan of the later 3 sequels or 3 films, but I would almost think that her character in the 2018 one shows more of just the lifelong misery and trauma that she's been in.
Sure. Dealing
it in different ways. Right. Whereas in H2O, she's apparently a functioning alcoholic. It doesn't, to be in the position that she's at, she seems to be dealing with it pretty well. That she's running a boarding school or I guess a high school.
She's the headmistress of the.
Yeah. So for having that much trauma that she's dealing with, she's doing pretty okay. Where I think in the 2018, she's a wreck and everybody thinks she's crazy. And yes, she's gone militant and all that. But I think her reputation even shows that she's a nutcase.
Well, by the report, she's had 2 failed marriages, and we know she has at least 1 child out of that, product of that. So I mean, she wasn't just locked in her compound for 40 years.
But I think it shows more effectively that she's dealing with trauma after all these years, more so than in H2O. And nothing against Curtis. I mean, it's the role that was written.
Right.
I just had a hard time feeling that she is that stressed out and that traumatized, but yet has got this facade on that everything's fine. And her son knows all of this and has never told anybody up until he tells his girlfriend. Really?
Right.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I found the H2O one more believable in my own way because she's almost like in witness protection, right? They make a joke of it. Oh, you were in witness protection. The idea of snapping completely away from that life, starting a whole different life, and you're playing that game the entire time. She starts unraveling when the past starts to show up, right? And so that's when we start seeing her drinking and all that. She's playing a school marm named whatever the fuck her name was in that. Like the thing that's a little weird is how protective she is of her son. Like, you can't leave the grounds is kind of strange. But I actually thought that it worked pretty well. Whereas the survivalist thing, I just kept seeing Linda Hamilton, right? This is the whole thing after T2. Everybody's going to have this transformation. And I was just like, what's she doing for money? I mean, the house isn't well kept, but it's also got like this Rube Goldberg device in it and all this stuff that just felt like that's once again, we need to do something for the fans, right? You make this big, crazy thing where she's got all these mannequins. You know how expensive mannequins are? They're expensive to get. And she's just blowing them away for 40 years. It just was kind of a strange thing. It was emblematic of something.
Maybe she's a mannequin salesperson. And he just left. That's it.
That's it. That's all it took. Aaron, did you want to speak to Laurie?
I'm sorry.
I've got her right here. No, do you want to speak to the Laurie Strode subject?
You know, I don't know that I have a particular opinion about that. It strikes me that obviously David Gordon Green and company knew that they had H2O to reckon with. They knew that that was the last time the fan public had seen Laurie Strode. And yes, she was, I mean, as John says, she's a functioning alcoholic, you know, but she's still pretty together. She's not like the janitor of the school, you know, she's and no offense to janitors, but I'm just saying that she's obviously done some hard work and she's succeeded. Yeah. Whereas the other Laurie Strode has succeeded in becoming just completely infatuated with protection. And I also think that they were made in two different times. Halloween H20 was made before social media, and the David Gordon Green movies were made after social media and the saturation of the internet. And so we just have, I think that her character is a function of that that difference. So I don't know if I have big opinions about it.
There was something I wanted to throw in because I just recently saw Halloween Ends, and there was something, again, the idea of the big ideas is that you've got a sense of a bit of victim blaming, that like because Laurie was traumatized and she quote unquote brought this boogeyman to our town. Now we're going to be, angry at her. We're going to be angry at anybody who was, and it's like, no, this is the victim. And I would like to think that David Gordon Green was trying to make a commentary on that. At the same time, I feel like the fans are going, yes, that's right. Like that's what happens when evil, when you're surrounded by evil things happen. But I thought it was interesting also because I also just rewatched Christine, the John Carpenter version of the Stephen King novel, and you see a similar track from Arnie turning into Christine's, from our character Corey. Like he starts off as the nerd with glasses and then shifts over and becomes the homicidal maniac by the end.
Yeah, that's all intentional. I mean, they talk about how even the killing of the 4 bad guys is like Buddy Ripperton and the group, and they kill with a tow truck. But it's not Christine. But in that whole big sequence, there's that bit where they chase down the chubbier girl, and she's trying to get up the gate and everything. And he's dressed like Arnie Cunningham in the first scene where he comes to babysit the kid. There's a lot of that works and doesn't work at the same time. I think that's one of the more interesting things I found watching these 3 together. There's a big difference between waiting 2 years or whatever to see a movie that you're almost positive is going to disappoint you in some way, and then sitting down and watching 3 movies in a row and seeing a clever thread going through them, and that there's more going on than expected. Like when I first saw them all, I was like, God, it's just heavy-handed. It's like he doesn't know cinema language. I felt when I was watching the 3 films, especially Halloween 2018, was that this is a guy who's a Halloween fan but not a horror fan. He doesn't seem to understand how to put together a suspense scene, but he knows how to deal with Michael Myers being in the frame, because there were a lot of things where it's just like, well, just throw more blood. If we throw more blood, that's what's going to work. The kids will love it when we get to Halloween Kills. And it felt like maybe it was just a little bit off, but watching it this time, I was going, fuck, if I don't see something interesting here. With that said, does it work? Every scene, it's like this works, but this doesn't quite work. This is good, but this kind of doesn't. And one of the things that I liked was, fuck, it's cool that they're going down this kind of assimilation of Christine to talk about how, what does she say? She says something like, evil doesn't go away. It changes shape. Evil doesn't die, it changes shape, which I think could be Halloween Kills and Halloween Ends, the kind of the thing that's the theme that's in there. But I love that. I loved how they brought in Season of the Witch kind of things. Each of those movies is kind of like a nod to the people who know, right? So the second movie takes place right after the first one by seconds, and it's in a hospital. So it's a lot like Halloween 2, right? The third one, everybody was pissed because it didn't have any Michael Myers. You don't see Michael Myers for like 40 minutes in this one. And it's not about, the Halloween experience per se. It's this whole different thing that was where Carpenter was going. That's a lot of inside material. Yeah. I appreciate that. And yet I'm not sure, are these 3 like really, really strong? I will say that Ends ended up being my favorite, which I did not expect because it was so different, because it had this strangeness to it. So anyway, I think I'm just rambling.
Well, it was not my favorite, but I'll say this about it. I loved at the beginning of Ends, just quickly, I loved that David Gordon Green tells you that no one's safe. I mean, the killing of that kid is so, it just comes out of nowhere, and it's so brutal. Yeah. And it's also accidental, so it's kind of almost more tragic for that reason, but it doesn't leave the kid any less dead and, hideously dead. And I thought, man, I find that movie to have some of the more questionable moments in the trilogy nowadays, but I still enjoy it for its balls.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. Like all three of David Gordon Green's movies are ballsy. They make some really bold choices while at the same time kind of like shoring it up with the fan service moments. And I'm like, that's why I think you're kind of hit it there, Scott. It's like it's an uneasy stew. I'm like, I really like this and I really don't like that. And I'm interested the whole time, but I'm not loving it. And I feel like I'm okay with that to a certain point. It isn't like it's something I'm going to pop in over and over and over again. I can watch the first Halloween, from 1978 on a constant loop. I'm never disappointed. Even the things that don't, that feel kind of clunky, I'm like, I still love it. That's fine. That's fine. To that end, when we talk about Michael Myers, you guys already pointed out, like the Michael Myers that we see in H2O, not a good Michael Myers. He does not move like Michael. He doesn't look like Michael. It just feels weird and kind of just plugged in. That said, as you said, Scott, the interaction between Laurie Strode and Michael Myers, I think, is great. Like I love when she decides she's not going to run anymore, and she stops and she locks the gate. And she's like, now, the hunted becomes the hunter. And you get a genuine face off. And I love when she steals the ambulance and like goes, I'm going to finish this. And it's like, yeah, it's weird and absurd, but I'm like, I'm on board at that point. I'm like, yep, Laurie, you got to take this out. And I love that it comes to the ending that it comes to, where just for a brief moment, you felt like you'd actually ended the Halloween franchise in a legit way. Now, we talk about Michael Myers in 2018. I'm like, okay, this guy's 61 and it feels like he inherited all of his mutant superpowers from the Rob Zombie version, where this guy can like destroy a police car from inside. He's just enormously strong. I'm like, so Smith's Grove has like a really awesome personal training program that they don't talk about in the brochure.
Most of these movies are about Michael Myers, which has never really been that exciting to me. What's exciting to me is the shape.
Mm-hmm.
The first movie is the shape. The beginning of that movie is Michael Myers, and somewhere along the line, by the end of that movie, he's the shape. And so it's interesting that through most of these movies, they're calling him Michael Myers. I believe it even says that, but at the last film ends calling him the shape. And they still call him Michael Myers in the dialogue, but the credits and things like that, it's the shape again. And I do feel that it's not this guy anymore, right? I mean, there's this weird thing of, is he living in the sewers? Is he actually doing this little Tooth for Tango thing? His best friend, My Bodyguard. The movie was My Bodyguard, that Chris Makepeace film. I actually called it Halloween Ends as Metropolis. At the end, the kids get together and there's this procession taking this dead body through. But there's something about the shape being an idea at the end, which I thought was really interesting, because that's what I always thought was cool. Once again, I see him as a myth, right? I see a myth come to life in this weird way, which is just a strange idea that Carpenter had, but that's what you could run with. That makes it more than the babysitter murders back in the day. And so I felt that it went back to that again. He's called the shape. And one of the things I always wondered is, why do you think Laurie Strode fetishizes Halloween so much? Like, you would think that she'd be like a Jehovah's Witness, right? Just not keep the house dark and everything. But she's like embracing it like a motherfucker through the last two films, especially the last one where she's healing and she's writing this book and everything. And she's got this stuff it almost looks like she got a house that looks like the old Myers house. There's a sequence in there where Corey and her daughter are downstairs kissing, and it's the staircase from the first movie. I was like, what the fuck? There's like this weird fetishization of the past that's subliminally happening in that film.
My favorite thing about the last of these films is exactly that thing you were kind of alluding to, Scott. I love the idea that whatever it is that makes Michael Myers, whatever that supernatural thing is that makes him that strong and makes him able to do whatever he's able to do, is somehow transmuted back into the community, and it seems to rob him of that power. So the community becomes Michael Myers, and then the community realizes it needs a Michael Myers, so it kind of builds one in Corey. but then Corey's not quite up to the task. You know, he's not quite calm and cool enough. He's still too human in a lot of ways. It's still too much like revenge. And so Michael Myers, the character, is able to reintegrate what you call the shape, whatever that magical thing is. But I do love about those films, and I'm glad that they end the way they do, he never tries to explain why. You know, you don't, there's never any like, well, here, you know, if you look over here, there's 5 of these, and, you know, I can make a chart, and they never do that. They just go, they're like, I don't know what it is, but we got to put him in a meat grinder.
Have you heard of the Thorn? Have you heard of the Thorn cult? Let me just lay that out.
Oh God, yeah. Another thing that I think is interesting is there's like this. Why I like ends as well is it was kind of alluded in Kills, the Bonnie and Clyde idea. Like the daughter has this thing with the Bonnie and Clyde. They dress up as Bonnie and Clyde, but in the second or the third movie, she's kind of ready to be Bonnie. She's like, I want to burn this fucking place down. I'm done with this. She gets that he's dangerous. She may not know that he's killed anybody. She doesn't know what we know, that he killed a vagrant. But when he says, I killed somebody, she just kind of leans into that. Right. And there's a moment when they're on the motorcycle together. You're going, this could be Badlands. This could be, this could go where this is the kill cult. These 2 kids going on a spree. And so when they're going to all these places, and, you know, like the whole thing of him wanting to climb up the radio tower and stuff, there's just these weird allusions to Charles Whitman. That's what I was thinking when he said that. There's like all these psychos are kind of talking about. And I found that interesting that there was this, instead of it being Laurie and the shape being this thing, or Laurie and Michael being this thing, there's this bit with the undercurrent of these children that have gone through all this stuff, and you can see how a rebel is made and how a killer is made. And there's a romanticism until it's no longer romantic. There's actually some shots of Corey when he's riding in his motorcycle, and I think they're at that point Laurie's reading something from her book, and it says something like that the psychosis can be hidden behind cold eyes. And they show him on the motorcycle, and they have that not a crash zoom exactly, but they use a wide lens close up, so the background doesn't look like it's moving at all. He's on the motorcycle, and he just seems looming large and mythic. And I was like going, that's really, really interesting. And I was like, God damn it, I thought I was going to just hate this fucking thing. It's like, I remember watching this going, and now I'm like, fuck, there's shit in here if you watch them all sequentially. Not that it's that great, but hey, you know, there's something there.
Yeah, I wasn't unhappy to have seen them, and I think that they all have things to think about.
They should put that on the box, really.
Right. I am Mr. Poster quote. Not entirely unpleasant. I feel like there's, again, I went back to watch the David Gordon Green films, and I was like, the big ideas are so clearly there, and there are times when I wish he had leaned more into his big ideas and just gone there, as opposed to trying to make a conventional Michael Myers film. I think that would have been interesting. It would have infuriated the fans, but I'm kind of like, that's, you know, sometimes I feel like that's what you need to do. Yeah. Go.
So that's one thing that I did want to mention. The big difference between like Carpenter and Gordon Green in runtime. First off, these things get longer as they go on, but I think the big thing is momentum, whether long or short. There is a halting, stagger step momentum that's slowly building in the David Gordon Green, but whereas it's just a Ramones album, the first John Carpenter movie. You know, right? It's just he understood momentum. He understood the way that the story has to just move forward. Every scene is in service of that night, right? Even whether no matter what character's on or not on the screen, they're talking about Halloween night. They're talking about Haddonfield. They're moving forward. The character is moving towards Haddonfield. He's coming home, and there's momentum like a motherfucker, and that's so memorable. But these movies, it's like, all right, there's a death, and now we're talking about rose petals in Japan, or whatever, or apple blossoms in Japan. Oh, do you ever eat any meat? Here's a guy who's a really colorful character giving you meat. There's bar scenes that go on. I'm captivated that there is interesting business that is character driven, but it has no momentum. There are moments in that movie stalls, then kicks up again. And when I say that movie, it could be 2018, it could be Kills, it could be Ends. All of them have the same thing where there's just not this streamlined idea of move us forward to that day.
I share the thoughts that you guys have mentioned, and I think that the reason that it's easier for me, because I totally understand it when people don't enjoy these David Gordon Green films. I get it because, like you've alluded to, there's a lot there that's head scratching from a filmmaking perspective and from a straight narrative perspective. But I realize that the thing that makes me different is that I'm an academic by trade, right? So I'm used to reading things that are not fun to read, but are filled with ideas that are fun to chew on.
Yeah.
And so for me, the films are that way. And that's the thing. I even posted on Facebook last night as I was watching this, like, I can't decide if I think these films are interesting because they're amazing or because they're atrocious. I'm still, the jury is still out for me on David Gordon Green's films as to why I'm so fascinated with them. But I do know that they've got me thinking about the larger themes that they bring up more than any new horror film has for a while.
Okay.
So I'll give them that at the very least.
I think for me, and again, like, I feel like H2O is a really well-made diner burger. Like, it gives me almost exactly what I came there to get. I'm like, cool, I want to see Laurie Strode face off against Michael Myers. I want you to explain to me how, what's been going on for the last 20 years. I want to see some murders. I want to have some, self-aware dialogue. And it delivers, and I want the movie to end and, for Michael Myers to, come to a satisfying conclusion. And I feel like that's what H2O delivers. It's not chewy. It's not throwing in like weird, like ingredients that don't belong in a burger, but they're still kind of interesting. So let me try it. Maybe I might even have to have that again sometime just to figure out what it is, how I really feel about it. And so I feel like that's kind of the difference between the two, is that H2O is exactly what you want, even if it isn't what you wanted, because, if you don't love the Michael Myers franchise, it ain't what you want anyway.
For everything that you're saying about that, I did feel when I walked into this, when I knew that we were going to watch all 4 films, I was going, well, I'm pretty sure the one I'm going to enjoy the most, it's going to be the most Halloween-y Halloween movie, it's going to be H2O. And I was not feeling that by the end. I don't know what I felt by the end, quite honestly. It's not like one that I went, wow, but I did feel that there was a lot of there in the 3 David Gordon Greens. I'm just not sure where there is, but it certainly felt like they were trying to punch somewhere. They were trying to do something a little bit different. And I don't, it's why you don't make these fucking movies in the first place, right? Because there's no winner. There's no way. You can't make everybody happy when it comes down to fan support. You got to try and do something original and new. You don't want to make the same old thing. And that's not going to please too many people. It'll make a lot of money, I guess. But it doesn't seem like it's something that's going to please people that much. I laugh that they gave the rights back to Akkad's son. So there's going to be more of these, but it's like you give it after you mulch the guy, right? Here's your franchise back, man. We turn them into pudding.
Oh, just ignore it. They never happened.
That never happened.
I mean, we've already set a precedent that's easy to do.
Laurie Strode, who's that? We never heard of her.
Yeah. I will say on the new trilogy, what's kind of confusing is that they're, making it adamant that the sequels never happened, but yet they make reference to everything in those that never happened. The Halloween 3 costumes. So if you're going to be set that standard that no, this took place right after, or this is the sequel to the first one, well, then why throw all those little fan moments in there? I mean, it's
dishonest as hell.
Pick a lane.
Halloween 3 happened. That's fine. I didn't have Michael Myers anyway.
Well, Halloween Kills is kind of like Halloween 3 because Michael Myers isn't really in it that much.
Halloween, the last one, you mean?
Halloween Ends. I'm sorry. Halloween.
I don't know why, but I do that all the time too. I keep getting ends and kills wrong. I'm not sure why.
I just look forward to the day that I can revisit these last 3 and actually see something worth merit.
And on that note, thank you all for coming out, because we're halfway to Halloween. I wanted to take time out to acknowledge these films and have this discussion, because I haven't been able to have this discussion because I hadn't seen Halloween Ends yet. So this was really all in service of me having somebody that I could sit down and talk about the movies with. So appreciate y'all, getting Trojan horsed in on this one. And apologies for having to watch H2O again.
Well, this is the way that I was going to watch these movies again, quite honestly. I mean, it's nobody ever asks me to watch these films, right? And I have no real, I don't have a burning desire to go back to them. So it was really, this is how it was going to happen. And, I appreciated what I didn't see before and other things that just firmly cemented what I thought earlier.
It's just, again, and I think we've talked about it here and we talk about it on our show all the time, Discover the Horror. It's a thing that I think you have to preach, which is revisit things that you think you love and revisit things that you think you hate, and revisit everything in between. Because, man, I just keep seeing these things with different eyes all the time. And it's been a pleasure to do it. Like I said, I didn't get a lot out of H2O. This wasn't the second time. I just watched it again a couple years ago. But, it's still fun to revisit and recontextualize in proximity to other films. So I've been jokingly cursing UAC, but actually I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. John?
I've just been cursing you.
It's true.
I agree with Aaron. It's imperative to revisit films. And unfortunately, I just do not find these that I guess maybe I went into it looking for the flaws. I think you're trying to emulate something that is, at the top of the list, and you're just failing miserably each and every time.
It's a tough mountain to climb.
Yeah, there's no film in this series that has even come close to being the original. So I guess maybe it's just sad seeing the multiple attempts by multiple people and go, nope, didn't make it. Nope. So, but yeah. I know there's a lot of fandom for this. So,
and that's the truth. It wouldn't be the first time, like we have lots of horror classics that the first one is the best one. And
true.
The sequels and the requels and the remakes are all kind of just so far down the hill. And you're like, there's a reason why this was, the perfect moment for that time.
Yeah, well, that's the killer. That's the killer of that. Halloween, what makes Halloween so great, in my opinion, that is that it broke away from a lot of things that were pretty obvious back in the time by just being a little bit creative, but being small, streamlined, all of that. There's not a lot there outside of the presentation of that movie, right? And right. Carpenter went on to say he was trying to break away from, he wanted the audience to bring everything to it, right? That's why you have a white mask. That's why you have coveralls that have no buttons or anything. There's nothing to grab onto. He's like a Kuleshov effect himself, as something that you bring the meaning as you're looking at this image. It's a mirror. And that's what made him so cool. And it was a one-off, right? So you're trying to create a franchise around something that was just a really cool idea that was iconic. It's like trying to retell a joke in a whole bunch of different ways. It's just but one way was the way that it worked. And so it's really tough to watch because every time what makes horror great for me is the unknown that they don't tell you. Like what Aaron said about David Gordon Green does not come up with a formula to be able to tell you what's happening or why he's killing. The whole idea is that nothing that's happening with the motivations in Halloween. They explain nothing. That's why I hate to. Well, I don't hate it. I can watch it, but I always, as soon as they start talking the sister thing, I'm like, what in the ass is this? Last thing I need to know is that we're going to have this happen, right? Because now it's no longer scary. It's the same thing that happened with Psycho, right? Psycho's scary because he could be anywhere, right? But now he's just an Oedipus problem, right? He's a guy who saw his mother have sex and then he killed somebody. So now, we have him behind bars. When you explain, it's no longer scary. The best stuff is unexplained. And all the Halloween movies are nothing but explanations and fan service. And so that makes it really, really hard. And I watch every one because I'm a glutton for punishment and a completist.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody. I promise we won't be coming back to Halloween H2O for at least another 5 years. So, but until
new
then,
friends, you're getting new friends, I hear.
Yeah.
we will be doing other things. And again, thank you so much. This is where, when people think horror fans, it's just all about the blood and guts. And like, no, I think it really, what intrigues us is the ideas behind it and why things work the way they work. And I appreciate y'all sharing your big brains with me. We will be back again.
An honor.
To come back and chat about some other ideas. Until then, keep searching, keep exploring, and keep sharing the scare.